evening and welcome to Inside the Rookery Season 11, Episode 4, where I am joined by Russell Zimmermann and hopefully in any second, an Andy Law. Hooray! Exactly on cue. Welcome to the stream, Russell. It is great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's always nice to be here. So.
Excellent. So today we're going to be talking about doing your homework. Andy Law, you helped come up with this title. So what are we talking about today?
I laugh maniacally because this is something that many a writer who has written, particularly for IPs and roleplay games, sort of forgets to do. And it's not often because of the writer. It's often because of the people who hold the IP. And it's doing the necessary homework to work on said IP, or if you're working on, say, a historical setting, doing the necessary homework for that to ensure that you spin something or whatever it is that you're creating that other people would recognize as fitting that. Whoops, I just heard myself. I've apparently got a window open. Just shut that down over the corner. So yes, it's doing your homework, doing your due diligence, getting down with everything that needs to be done before you start the work. And I'm going to probably lay into a couple of people on this one because I'm controversial.
Well, I have done my homework, and so have the patrons in the Discord community, because they have pre-submitted us some questions to ask Russell and you. Hooray! But as always, I'll be taking questions in from the chat or comments, things like this. Hawk says, I was so bad about homework in school. Me too, Hawk. Me too.
Yeah, a lot of homework in school is more about obedience than learning anything. So I increasingly don't blame people that are bad about some of their homework. Just always comes down to the class, the teacher / professor, and the intent behind the assignment, you know?
Hard agree.
Yep. Yeah, I was good at doing some kind of homework and less good at doing other kinds of homework. And quite often you would find me outside my Reggie class, because that's what we called them in Scottish schools. I guess you'd call it homeroom in the States. And we would be sitting there in the corridor doing our maths and physics homework. It was always maths, physics, or chemistry. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like essays as assignments. I'm a history professor also. I don't just do the geeky stuff. I am taking a semester off. Some AI stuff kind of pissed me off last semester, and I just didn't feel like it right now. So I'm just not teaching for a semester, focusing on some writing instead. But yeah, just big fan of essays and conversational essays. And that's the big thing I try to hit home is like, I want this class to be a dialogue between us, not just regurgitation of what's in your textbook. So I was about to say lucky enough that we're all living in interesting times, but I don't think luck is quite right for that. But there was a lot for me to mention when teaching U.S. history. There was a lot that I could try to tie into current events for why something new was an abomination. And, you know, comparing it to a historical precedent and, you know, trying to just get a back and forth from students where they were talking about modern events through the lens of history and vice versa. But yeah, just like multiple choice and stuff like those are just, it's just to be a grade feels like. You don't learn anything from doing multiple choice, but.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot on the stream over the past few months about the value of history, to hold up a mirror to yourself to see what kind of person you would be, and the heroic history delusion, as I have come to call it, that everyone looks at themselves in the past and thinks that they would have been part of that tiny percentage that stood up for what was right, that hid Jews in their basement, that went on freedom rides into the American South, that were suffragettes in the UK, and just by sheer arithmetic, like, you can't have been. We wouldn't all have been those heroes. So we need to ask ourselves questions.
Are you right now? Like there's an opportunity.
Exactly,
you know,
Russell.
That said, if you are, you shouldn't talk about it on the internet very much. So,
exactly. Because it comes with a cost, right? So we all have to make the decision of what cost we're going to pay to allow us to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Some people are paying a lower cost than others, apparently, and still sleeping quite well.
Yeah.
And we've got a history teacher in the comments. Yes, this is strangely serendipitous.
Nice.
Right. So let's get into the questions because I've managed to sidetrack us slightly. So John Peck asks, how do you make sure you get the balance right between too much and too little research and due diligence? And when did you start? Like, what was your way into having to do research for your work?
The neat part is I don't get that balance right. I pretty notoriously over research because that's just a part of how I'm wired. And again, my academic training, my formal training is all in history. I don't have a single creative writing class, even. So I think of things in that way, which is also very similar to how I play an RPG. We'll start up a new campaign, or I'll get an idea for a new short story, and the process is about the same for me. And I tend to get ideas for the details of a story or a character background or what have you by just jumping in on the homework. It's part of the creative process to me rather than being separate from it. And I just want to touch on like what Andy mentioned was doing research before you get started. And I'm not trying to pick on that mindset, but to me, it isn't before you get started. It's how I'm getting started and how I'm continuing while I go. And some of that has to do with professionally when I'm writing. Most of the properties that I'm working on right now have very long, very large histories for the setting. Shadowrun has been advancing more or less real time since 1989. It's now 30 some odd years later when the game started in 2050, and it's been a real time advancement. So you've got all of that lore that's been moving this whole time. Battletech has been similar, but a little bit more generational. There have been larger time skips. And then with Warhammer 40,000, there are however many bajillion stories out there. But one difference that is there that can keep me from doing too much research on, say, the Warhammer 40,000 end is that they've kind of got a baked-in excuse for some discrepancies. They are less concerned with exact dates, for instance, because in universe, faster than light travel is flying through hell, and you don't always pop out at the same time you left. You don't always pop out after the time you left. You can pop out 100 years before a planet makes the distress call, right? That you're supposed to be there for. Like, it's a real mess. And there's actually a secret war being waged within the Inquisition by a certain sect of the Inquisition that's in charge of keeping track of the date. And they're out there like assassinating each other and stuff to try to win this academic argument about what year it is in the 41st millennium or what have you. So there's some flexibility there that they're not as concerned with as, say, Battletech is, where we start every chapter of a story with a little list, kind of a placement thing at the start of a story saying, we're on this world, we're in this city, this is the date, and you do this kind of establishing shot. And there have been times I've done tremendous research just because I know I need that establishing shot. I learned the dates for Ramadan in the year 3037, I think it was. It's in the 3030s. But I just wanted it to be Ramadan for this little introduction of a story. And I went looking, and sure enough, there's websites that have it projected because they've got their specific formula and the math and stuff. So as a result of that research, I was able to write the 2 lines of text that I had planned in the short story. But then also I was able to impress the local guys at my bodega because I learned how to say Happy Ramadan, and it just completely made their day when I did that at the start of Ramadan, so you never know when the research that you're doing for a throwaway line of text in a story can turn into something that's useful in real life, or maybe just useful for a different story. A lot of times you can find a dangling plot hook in an RPG book that, can be the kickoff to something, or it can be a grounding point for a character or a story, right? It can be part of a backstory, or it can be something you tackle later. So yeah, that balance, I'm afraid I'm not the right one for that, because I just kind of go.
I'll try and take it from a slightly different angle.
Okay.
Balance for my personal stuff, I could give less of a fig, but not much. When it comes to my own personal stuff, I just go. I'm going down rabbit holes and learning about stuff that excites me and intrigues me and perhaps inspires me in different directions. In some respects, it's not even research. It's just doing the stuff I like because I'm kind of wired that way, somewhat similarly. But when it comes to professional things, I would say it's less a question of what's the right balance and more a question of what's the gig. What am I here to do? There's an enormous difference between, say, for example, doing a short story about something that's in a very quiet corner of a world or a setting that has never been tread upon. And it's just the core details of the setting that's required. A single book from the publisher will do, giving you a basic idea of what this place is. Compare that with tackling their core characters, their core themes, their core everything. You're then in a position where you got to do it all. You got to read everything. And different publishers handle that in a different way. Some just go, well, that's why we've hired you. So I presume you know this, which is definitely a route.
Welcome to the Forge World Anvil. I always call them Forge Anvil. The World Anvil crew who have just raided us. Today we're talking about doing your homework before or during you're embarking upon a writing adventure.
Quite.
And I do want to point out, the only answer that I have for how to strike the balance is look at it after the fact. Did you spend too long doing research? How much did you end up using the research that you did? But with the caveat that, to me, using the research can just be being inspired by it. So you might look something up and then not even toss a certain detail into your story or your adventure or what have you. But if in the process of doing the research, you found some other details that can ground your work and kind of feel like, setting touchstones and stuff. But yeah, I think the only answer to that is to look back after you're done, after you've made your deadline, after you've turned your work in, and go like, hey, did I overthink this or was it enough?
The answer is yes.
Yeah. But again, I think, it's also important to recognize that it doesn't necessarily need to make it onto the page to be part of that, to be worth it or not.
I could not agree with that more, because sometimes just sinking yourself into a particular setting or into a particular mindset, if it's a historical one, just reading the books about that era, it might have nothing to do with the individual details that you're needing to present, but it has everything to do with understanding how it all should knit together. I tend to find that I agree entirely with Russell, and that is I just kind of get lost in all the things that I'm doing. But when it comes to professional jobs, I am quite careful with my time because there's only so much of it and ensuring that it's used well. But for some jobs that's really hard. I'll give a single example. When I was asked to map Freeport, which is a long time ago now, by Green Ronin, this is long before I was doing things like Critical Role or whatever. This is me just taking a city that had been created by Chris Pramis, bringing it to life. Now, it had been done already once. This is the second edition where I was asked to come in. And when I came in, there was at that point around about 20 books released, and they had completely changed the city from its original sketches, completely. And a whole bunch of new locations were added. And I was brought in to just map what was in the new book, to which I said, can I have every book, please?
Yeah.
And their reply was, really? You want to read them all? And I was like, yeah, I do. Because there's going to be people who've read these other books and they're going to have an expectation that certain locations are there. They've played through a campaign that for them has been deeply personal. And they've seen all these places, they've imagined them. And if I then come in with the new map and say, haha, here's this quarter, and it's missing the giant ship that's on its side, they'll go, where the heck is that ship? Because that's what fans do. They look for the things that are personal to them. the things that they themselves remember, which means that I need to research the lot. That's a very different ask to doing a map of, say, a glen somewhere in the middle of nowhere. But for something like that, the research is absolutely essential. And it took about 2 weeks to get hold of all those books because some of them are relatively old. And it was a lot of reading, but worth it because it gave me around about 40 locations that would otherwise not have been depicted. And when the map came out, it got itself awards. Everybody loved it. And I was like, yay, well, that was time well spent. But not every job feels like that.
We've managed to answer one question, so I'm going to move us along slightly and get us on to answer maybe a few more. So a quick fire one. Shady Elf asks, how do you organize your research? Do you have a system for keeping track of all those fascinating rabbit holes that might be useful someday? And as World Anviler here, we should point out that a lot of creators do use World Anvil to collate their own creations and to index what they need.
Yeah, I've done a few projects where people were using Word Anvil. For myself, though, I am kind of a basic bitch, and I just use Microsoft Word for almost everything I do ever. So I'll pop open, like right now I'm working on a novel for 40K, and my monitor's big enough to have 2 full-size things on it, and I've got my Word document that I'm writing in on one side, my Word document that's the same, like the title of the book, and then notes all in caps, right? And I've got that on the other side of my monitor. And then on other monitors, I have PDFs or browsers open to be doing the research. And just as I come across something, I scribble it into the Word document, and I let it kind of organically form. There's a trick that people use when they're designing like a city park or a campground, where initially they might not lay out every trail. For like a walking path across grass, for instance, you could lay out the major stuff, and then you wait and see where people walked. And then you go, oh, people really liked to go straight from the parking lot to this pond. We'll pave that, or what have you. And that's kind of how my brain works when it comes to my notes document for any given product. I find I start to list potential character names somewhere, and I do have to list characters I've introduced if you're writing a regiment for Battletech or Warhammer. But I tend to kind of create those neighborhoods in the Word document kind of organically, just wherever I started listing something, and then it's just there. And it makes perfect sense to me, and my editors never ever see it, because I will not be judged by their thought processes of my notes. Just worry about the finished product, champ.
My answer is easy. Ditto.
Yeah, for the second part of the question, though, I use my phone notes app. So I'll just have notes on my phone with random titles like Song for Ladriel, or I don't know. Like, it's got everything. It's not just creative stuff. It's like my Christmas present ideas, something I need to remember for next week, and it's just all in notes. So occasionally I have to go through my notes just to be like, have I missed anything? Have I forgotten anything that I should have written yet? Oh, was waiting for Mr. Zimmerman to say he was getting message from Henry Cavill saying that this, that, or the other is correct or incorrect.
I am luckily far below the esteemed Mr. Cavill's notice with the occasional short story and novel that I'm working on for Black Library right now. He's so far, unless he's been in secret, DMing me with alternate accounts, which feels like it's weird, because if I was Henry Cavill, I would tell everybody all the time, and I would never opposite catfish people as some random Discord note. I'd be like, "Hi there, Henry Cavill here, by the way." But so luckily,
tell me about this lore.
Luckily, not been an issue for me.
So this is a question from the comments. How would you go about setting up a conspiracy for a story or a TTRPG? What are the most important things to consider / research?
I would say the most important thing to consider is that real life is stupid, and stories need to make sense, but reality doesn't. So the question becomes, with a conspiracy or with trying to tell a mystery story, or just kind of any story with a plot where things happen, which is every story, is just like, decide for yourself, are you trying to tell a good story first? And does something need to happen in your cockamamie conspiracy? Because if you need to have something happen and you work backwards, you can probably find a way to do it in the middle of a conspiracy or a big enough city or what have you. Because again, just real life is real stupid. Look at just the assassination. Sorry,
real
go ahead.
life being so stupid is kind of why conspiracy theories are so attractive, because conspiracy theories package up randomity as done on purpose. And
They
humans
make
like
things
it when
make
stuff's done.
sense.
We like it when things make sense. We like it when we see a pattern. So yeah, maybe if you're setting up a conspiracy, what you should just do every now and then is just get like a D100 table of random events and just roll one. Just randomly add that into your conspiracy.
Yeah, but look, like the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Look
That's
at
a
what
great
a
one.
clusterfuck that assassination was. But then also look at the Black Hand in World of Darkness, where they're these super badass, cool assassin guys. And then you go, all right, well, like, which one did they care about? Making a bunch of super cool assassin guys, or realistically describing how an assassination went down, right? Like, that's kind of, you just have to decide what you want for your story. And by story, I include RPG campaign, but like, what do you want a conspiracy for? And then I bet you can find one just as stupid in real life that is actually how something happened.
Yeah, the Franz Ferdinand one is such a good example because they'd gone down the wrong route, right? And a bunch of the assassins had literally wandered off. They were like, oh, well, this isn't going to happen. And then they turned down the wrong road. And one of the assassins just there. And he's like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to shoot him now.
Yeah, he was sitting there eating a sandwich.
Literally eating a sandwich.
Yeah, amazing. And then the other assassins had like the dumbest failure points of like, I threw a bomb and it kind of did a cartoon bounce off the car. And one guy had a cyanide caplet that wasn't enough to kill him. And he jumped off a bridge into water that wasn't deep enough to drown him. And like, right. And you're just like, man, like, I guess rolling ones happens in real life too, right? Like, just this back-to-back. All right, roll a 1 to, self-delete with your cool super spy cyanide caplet. And he's like, yeah, no, what if that just doesn't work? Yeah, so you never know. Like, it's all just...
Sometimes I like to lay on an additional conspiracy theory that all of those failures and that were like time travelers trying to stop World War I, because if World War I hadn't happened, right, the world would have been a better place. But then other time travelers realized, no, like it would be even worse if World War I hadn't happened. So they're coming in and trying to make the assassination happen. So yeah.
Make for a farcical roleplay game session.
Yeah, a paranoia session.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another question from the comments. So for a properly big setting, I know how to start small and work outwards, but if most of the setting is a blank canvas, how do you know how much homework to do? Where do you stop?
For me, I so far have not ever written completely my own setting, but there are times that I've kind of gotten in on the ground floor. There's a skirmish game and RPG called Gangs of the Undercity. The RPG is Subversion. It's kind of a what if Shadowrun wasn't America-centric and also like just Western European-centric culturally. And a bunch of us that worked on Shadowrun made this. And it's just an attempt to kind of fix some of the kind of social stuff in Shadowrun that maybe wasn't handled well. And with that, I was in kind of real time as we were forming stuff. So it was a matter of, all right, as you design, tell somebody, right? And that's where something like a World Anvil or whatever comes in. And there, the key was just communication rather than a where do you stop? It was how do you make sure to tell everybody and make sure that the details that you're adding aren't taken away from somebody else's details or what have you. And a part of that in terms of to start small, but also a finish small, one thing you can do is put in a qualifier on any statement that is meant to be a statement of fact. If you're saying how an assault rifle works in a cyberpunk game, just say this model or that year's version of the Ares Predator or what have you, right? So kind of put in a little qualifier, and you can get away with not sometimes needing as much homework while also not definitively stating something that someone else might trip over. And that's where the size of the setting again comes in. But if you practice those sort of sentences, where you can kind of put in a little qualifier here and there when providing some detail, that can go a long way towards keeping you from going down the rabbit hole of reading every single book and finding out what side of a gun the safety release thumb switch is, or not thumb switch always, because it could be a finger, but like you don't want to let yourself get too bogged down in that. And if you find yourself at a point where you feel like you're getting bogged down, just make something up and then cover for it in whatever writing you're doing. So if you're trying to find all the details of a ninja clan for an RPG session, maybe just rename that ninja clan and say it's a splinter extremist group, and now you can cut off your research and not try to be keeping up with every book as it comes out, or that sort of thing. So just find ways to kind of patch over holes, and that can cover for some of it.
Joe says it's just me for this project, but for context, it's based on the US turning into 40-ish little kingdoms after a magical doomsday. So magical doomsday when, please?
The magical doomsday. I do have one piece of advice then, because it can be a little bit like trying to organize chaos if you just have an enormous white page in front of you and all possibility ahead. Make a plan, decide what you actually want to write, and then research for that. Say, for example, you've decided that you want to do a big version of the US. That can be a very daunting task. But if the task is instead, I'm going to be writing, say, 3,000 words over what happened in this era, that immediately goes, well, I've not got a lot of space, so what do I need to ensure is said? And then you can make your quick plan about what you want to say. And the second you do that, you then know, well, to say that, I need to research this. And it can hopefully channel you towards appropriate research that doesn't lead you really just going book after book after book of cool stuff. And it might help. But yeah, plan.
So yeah, sorry, but the answer is just, it depends.
Hello, can you hear me? StreamYard just crashed for me, so I'm back. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Excellent. Well, that's good. Well, let's pretend that never happened.
That was weird.
I was just going to say, before StreamYard crashed, that we've got a couple of good streams on world building with Tom Toner, Casper Guion. So the EU streams, look those up on our YouTube channel.
The extreme world building streams.
Yeah, extreme world building, extreme wildcard world building. And he has a few techniques that he uses, and they were quite good. We built some whole worlds on the stream live with the chat, and it was really good fun.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm going to go back. Someone's got a question about Shadowrun. Where is it?
I just tackled that one in text. I put it in the chat. So yeah.
Excellent.
So
good, because I was about to say I haven't played them, so I cannot add anything to that. So Martine asks, does accuracy really matter? And as a follow-up, have you ever regretted doing research for a project? So let's start with, does accuracy really matter?
For what I do, accuracy matters based on what's in my contract and who I'm writing for.
Yeah.
And again, there are ways to cover up for inaccuracies or to prevent accuracy from needing to be the case, in that you can just make stuff up. My first Black Library story, I made sure to just make up a little world somewhere and make up some new regiments and this, that, and the other. So for that, I didn't have to read the entire Horus Heresy plus Gaunt's Ghosts to research something, because I'm like, no, I'm just going to make up a small planet that no one's ever heard of, and problem solved. So there's that. I would say in a grander scale, accuracy matters less than believability, or let's call it consistency. So yeah, it honestly just depends on the project, for how much accuracy matters versus close enough. Because sometimes you are tossing hand grenades instead of horseshoes, so you can get away with less detail. Sometimes accuracy and doing your homework by reading up on a setting or real life history or what have you, sometimes that really has to take a backseat to gameplay, because the actual blast radius of a frag grenade in real life doesn't matter compared to how grenades work in that game, right?
Yeah.
If it's always just a 5-foot AoE, you need to keep the kind of game engine in mind when you're writing fiction also. So yeah, just unfortunately the answer to does accuracy really matter is also it depends.
Yeah,
But
it does depend. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to agree on that one. I mean, how could it be anything else? Every single project is going to be different. For some projects, accuracy is the project, ensuring that you nail exactly what that particular setting offers and all of the details that have been presented in the past. Other projects, because they come from different publishers, they don't care about that at all. And you'll often find that the publishers will often have a completely different view to the viewers or the readers as well, where the readers might be very keen on accuracy, where the publisher is much less so, and they're just much more interested in cool stories within a very loosely defined defined set of parameters. Couldn't say the word defined. Defined set of parameters. So you'll find, does accuracy really matter? It depends on the publisher, depends on the readers, depends on the project. It is really, really variable. As an individual though, just me, I find it does matter, and I would prefer to be accurate than not. And I would prefer to do something in whatever work that I'm doing that will be accepted by all level of fans in that particular setting. So if they're super into their detail, they won't see anything that contradicts it. But if they're not into it, they'll just have something cool. And that would be my preference, but I understand that's not the preference of many publishers.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of finding as many little tiny details as I can and kind of mentioning them in a story, and that appeals to probably about 2% of readers that are probably the type of people that are updating the wiki page for a given game at any time, or but for the people that get their brain tickled the same way, if you casually mention some little offhanded detail and they pull that thread and they go find one small adventure note somewhere, so yeah, I like to do that when I can. But again, it just depends on this, the size of the story that you're telling, in that how much should it be connected to the rest of the setting, and also is there word count enough to worry about accuracy to that extent, so yeah. And then what was the other half? Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, I'll go to the other half. But I was just going to say, sometimes pure accuracy leads to the Tiffany problem, where because people think of Tiffany as an 80s name, if you actually called someone from the 19th century Tiffany, which was a really common abbreviation of another girl's name, like people would be like, oh, that breaks my immersion in it. But technically, you could absolutely have someone called Tiffany. So we quite often end up talking about the Tiffany problem, don't we, on this stream for some reason. Yeah. The second part was, have you ever regretted doing research for a project?
Professionally, no. Personally, as a gamer, I regret it when I go a little nuts researching a Vampire the Masquerade character, which are the ones I tend to put like the most work into. And then we play a session and I never get to play that vampire again after I read exactly at what point in Paris they had established that all college students were also protected by the laws that pertained to members of the priesthood. And that turned into the plot hook for this character being a smuggler and stuff, because he was, so it's like, I hate when I do this level of work and I dig and dig and dig and I find the real life history, and then I go compare it to this clan book and that clan book and this Dark Age source book and over and over, and I get all of it together and I make it work. and then we do a session of vaguely mistrusting each other, and then we just never get back to a campaign, right? Like, so the only times that I've regretted it has been more a regret of not getting the chance to do it. I don't regret that I picked up that random factoid, which also, again, to me as an academic was interesting. Just like, hey, yeah, like we should be protected by papal law, yeah, so it's that sort of just interesting thing. But again, that's how I'm wired as a person. If I regretted factoids, I would be in the wrong line of work.
Yeah. I've never regretted doing research, but sometimes I do regret telling people about research because I have an annoying, like if someone says something, if I'm in a different context, if I'm at work or if I'm out for dinner and someone says something that I know to be like wrong. So if someone says, oh, you know how a sirloin got its name because Henry VIII knighted it sirloin, I'll be like, no, I think you'll actually find it's the French etymology of the word. Or I'll fight you mano a mano, but I can't fight you mano a mano because you're not a man. And I'll be like, well, I think you'll find that's hand to hand. And I hate myself for doing that, but I have to do it.
Yeah, it's a little touch of the tism thing with that sort of urge of
I just can't help it. Yeah,
you just gotta.
And it's fine. But sometimes it's been like my boss who's really prided himself on his like academic rigor, and I'm like, well, no, actually, I did it once when I was like 14. When I was like 13 or 14 and I'm in social education at school, which is what we call, I don't know what you call it elsewhere, but that's what it's called in Scotland, SE. And my teacher was like, well, so a cesarean section, because we were doing childbirth and stuff, great fun, is called that because that's how Caesar was born. And I was like, well, actually, I think you'll find it's from the Latin for cut. And Mrs. Innes wasn't that impressed, but at the same time she was, because she was married to my history teacher, Mr. Innes, and Mr. Innes would have looked at you with a steely blue gaze if you had got any small detail about the First or Second World War wrong. So I did it for him, really.
Nice.
My answer to this one's super short as well, and it's a no. But
Never.
I have regretted taking on some jobs that required a lot of research, and found myself having to do an awful lot in a relatively short period of time, and to which I say critical role because they didn't have a world Bible, so I had to go frickin' watch it. That, at the time, was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. I'll be fine. Where's the details? Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. 220 hours later. Okay, well, I've done the first bit.
Mr. Mike of the Grail, not to seem petulant, but may I request you answer the mandatory Horus Heresy question? Not to seem pedantic, but you didn't put a question mark on your question, so I didn't know it was a question.
What did I miss here?
Sorry, but I genuinely skimmed over it as a comment because it doesn't have a question mark at the end. Gotcha. I was like, that's not a question. So, Mr. Mike always asks us a Horus Heresy question. Some guests, Ryan Airy the other week, wasn't necessarily as prepared for it as you will be. How well did the Horus Heresy do its homework with the different cultural influences with legions, etc.?
First, one caveat: I haven't worked on Horus Heresy stuff yet. So I am by no means the expert that I could be there. I haven't had to read it for work as much. They're kind of siloing stuff a little between the intellectual properties of Horus Heresy and 40K. And I actually got in a little bit of trouble for mentioning some Horus Heresy stuff too much in a 40K story, where they're just like, we're trying to kind of separate them a little. But so one caveat, I'm not as professionally into it as I could be. Second caveat would be just kind of that clearly the 40K universe is different than ours. And I think that it's easy to backtrack those differences. So maybe the cultural influences were accurate if something came up that was inaccurate to real life. Maybe it's just the alternate reality rearing its ugly head and that sort of thing. For me, I know my biggest concern when I'm researching cultural influences is respect, even more than accuracy. An effort goes a long way. I did a bunch of stuff on stickball, a Native American or Indigenous American sport, for a trilogy of Shadowrun stories I did. And I ended up reaching out to a stickball YouTube creator.
Nice.
And just messaged him and just thanked him in the book. And, we had a nice little dialogue. And I said, hey, can you read this like one page where I'm describing this character that's growing up playing stickball in a kind of Friday Night Lights sort of, this is important to his character growth sort of way. And just making the effort with good intent goes a long way in my experience. And getting some small details wrong matters less than being respectful and generally polite and positive and making an earnest effort. And I think it's because and it tends to be marginalized people that you are kind of concerned about this with, but like most of us understand that, you don't necessarily need to do a 3-page essay on the Stonewall riots if you're just mentioning in passing that there's a pride parade going on, or like just kind of make an earnest effort, get right what you can get right, do the exposition you need to do the expositioning of, right, and just mean well, and that can go pretty far in my experience.
I think Horus Heresy is interesting as well, right? Because they inherited those cultural influences from 40k, right? So 40k established the legions, and the legions came from 30k. So that story of the emperor was always there. But I actually think it's a really interesting question, and it's sort of irrelevant to how accurate those legions are to our cultures that they are drawn from, because you've got people writing in the 80s and 90s that drew influence from cultures that they know, but then you've got the actual story of why they're that in 30k and 40k, and you can either say, well, it's because the emperor, who was an immortal, remembered those cultures, and like, I don't know, maybe he admired them, maybe he decided that he wanted to impart that into his sons, or maybe it's just sheer chance that those Primarchs ended up on planets that have cultures that are somewhat reminiscent of cultures that happen to exist in our world that Games Workshop writers thought was cool. But I think the answer for me is it's kind of irrelevant, as long as, Russell, as you say, if you are drawing cultural influences from our world and it's not a culture that you are yourself from or that you're hugely aware of, that you do it respectfully and with the appropriate amount of research, and don't be a dick about it.
Yeah, for a less extreme example than the Warhammer universe, which could start almost any sentence, but in BattleTech, the great houses and successor states are very culturally coded as they were seen in the 80s, right? Same with a lot of cyberpunk stories where Japan is this huge thing, right? But in BattleTech, there's been established in the lore that it's a pseudo-Japanese culture by the time the 3000s are rolling around that is distinctly its own thing. It's Curitan culture, not purely Japanese anymore. And they established that it became this kind of culturally mandated thing where you had to kind of act a certain way. And it was based on like that supreme ruler's ideas of Japanese culture. So it's really had 1,000 years to turn into like weeaboo culture instead of accurate Japanese culture, right? Like it's this guy's idea that has then continued to change for 500 years or what have you. So I think it's just a matter of, what do you need it to do in a story? What has a culture already been established to be like in other stories there? And, try to strike a middle ground.
If you go back to the original Horus Heresy, Space Marine, the box set when it came out, we're talking way back now. So Space Marine comes out, and because they basically only have Space Marine sprues, they went, I know, We'll just have Space Marines fighting Space Marines. Sorted. So there's the genesis of the Horus Heresy, the Space Marine box set and one plastic sprue. And Mike Brunton, who I had the pleasure of speaking to a great deal about this, was given the laudable task of justifying all of this. And he created a lot of what would become later the core that everyone else would use for the Horus Heresy. And he just kind of made it up on whatever whim was required on a particular day. And I had a discussion with him about this and what it had become, and he was like, yeah, wow, it's like not what we were building. And he had an opinion on this exact question, which was, I wish I'd done it better, and I wish we had taken it more seriously, because we were just making a cool little game. That was it. We didn't think it was going to become this cultural behemoth. So I really wish I'd done it better. And now that I've seen what they've done with it, I really wish they'd done it better too. Some of it's great. Other parts of it are unfortunate because they took a lot of the worst stuff that he'd created and they just ran with it rather than going...
Or magnified it.
Or magnified it. Today, we're going to just draw a line and say, from this point onwards, we're doing it this way, which 40K has done multiple times. I will just say one word on that, Necrons. They're this, no, they're this, no, they're this. They're in a position where they can easily reorganize as preferred. But yeah, I'd say that the answer to this one is variable.
Yeah. This is an interesting question, because in a way it's a more existential question than just how do you sustain your enthusiasm for homework week in, week out? Because if homework is the job, if research is part of writing, how do you sustain your enthusiasm for the whole thing?
For me, the one answer is mental health problems and just being wired to enjoy this, right? But no, it's a lot of it also is just the I get a lot of satisfaction. No, it's not that.
No, not the money.
I get a lot of satisfaction out of kind of solving a story like a puzzle, which is sometimes a problem. Some businesses want a much more detailed synopsis before you start writing, for instance. And if that goes on for too long, my brain just goes, no, we solved that already. I don't want to tell that story anymore. Like, we already told it. And I'm like, hey, brain, you told it to your editor. And it's like, yeah, no, that counts. Yeah. So it's a matter of, I enjoy kind of creating the story, and I enjoy the research that helps me do that. And that sort of motivation is often really super great, but there's times that it can get in the way if something feels too much like work and too little like creation after a while, is when I find I have trouble staying enthused for it. But for the most part, I just am lucky enough to really like doing what I do, and telling these cool stories and kind of helping parts of these settings make sense, and helping explain away things that might at a glance look like they don't make sense with some new bit of lore that I've written or what have you. I enjoy that. And that's the secret is just like I like that kind of solving problems part, and the homework is how I kind of assemble the puzzle pieces that I then use to put together and tell a story. So it's just a part of the satisfaction of the process to me.
Ditto.
I feel like it's like back to that difference between maths homework and English homework, and that was the English and history homework had lots of answers, and you could give a good one, but whereas maths and physics and chemistry had right answers that I needed to find. And that kind of for me is the difference between a creative how I sustain my enthusiasm for creative work. It's not a right answer, it's like my answer.
I broadly agree with that one. In fact, I hard agree with that one, because maths has an answer that everybody already knows. There is no creativity involved. Yeah, there is the step-by-step process, and it arrives at the end where when it came to English, there was the analysis, the critical thinking, the history of it all. If we're moving on to history and the different ways of interpreting the evidence before you. So you're telling a different story, and putting that story together is half the fun.
Yeah, I used to do like matching on exams when I was teaching history, but the matching was also the short answer part of the test. And there was no right or wrong match. It was match two of these and then tell me why. And they were, 10 points each or whatever. So there was wiggle room for partial credit, but it could be a matter of like, these two were both presidents. And I'm like, all right, that's like a 7, buddy. But it's these two were the presidents on the opposite sides of this war, and they had this peace conference, right? Like it's, I always told the students, like, these short answers are your chance to tell me that you were paying attention and this stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, like having that room to explain how you got to an answer, that makes perfect sense to me in the humanities. But show your work in a math class, and I'm like, I'll stab you with this pencil, right? Like, it's like, my work, it's math.
Yeah.
I saw how many times I could fit the number 2 into the number 4. And like, what do you mean, show you my work, right? So yeah, but yeah, having that flexibility is kind of my whole job, right? If I come up with an answer, by which I mean a story, the rest of my job is to justify that story, right? To link together these cool fight scenes that I have whipped up and this emotional aftermath moment that came to me as the initial genesis of a novel or what have you. Like, my job is to then justify it and make it all make sense. And I get to do that. So yeah, for me, it's just that sort of thing. It's just, solving a problem and adding those details to solve it the right way, or the official way, or the way that makes sense, yeah.
I'm going to bring this one, and I don't know if you're a GM, but if not, we'll get Andy Law to answer it, because we know he is. How much do you prepare for your TTRPG sessions? How much of your GMing is contingency preparations, and how much is improvisation?
Well, I did GM a huge campaign here on YouTube for Song of Ice and Fire RPG.
Oh, nice. I did some work in that back in the day.
It's called A Sea of Spears. So you can find us. I went for a real long time. We got off to a little bit of a rocky start because I initially kicked off the campaign with about a day and a half notice. Because of some industry drama, we canceled a game that we were about to start, and we went, oh crap, what are we going to do? And I was like, I guess I could run Song of Ice and Fire. And then it spiraled from there to about a 2-year game of playing every other weekend. Little rocky start, but we got a little bit better later. But for that, I had a very broad arc in mind with occasionally specific touchstones of scenes where I really wanted to be like, all right, then this character needs to be allowed to shine in this spot, right? But for that one, it was a lot of contingencies. But the way the game world worked, I was able to work them into the story very organically. When the lord of your noble house is presenting the children of the house with their options for who they're going to marry, that's from me narrowing it down to 3 or 4 options each. And then I'm able to present them in universe in a way that mostly means they're stuck with one of those options. And then I had some different storylines in mind based on who they married, and a certain battle could go differently based on what house they were allied with, or, what have you. So I had a lot of if-then in my notes for that one. And that's also just kind of how I try to write adventures, which I don't do a whole lot of. I did several for Shadowrun pretty early, but they paid a flat rate for a lot of work. So I did the ones I wanted to tell the cool stories I wanted to tell, and I stopped doing them. But yeah, a lot of it is an if-then, which published Shadowrun Adventures have a section where they're like, what do you do if the characters attack the guy trying to hire them, or have, like, what can go wrong? And then when you're writing the adventure, you try to say how to fix something if it goes wrong. And that kind of just shaped my GMing style to an extent, of just trying to think of a couple different ways something could go and how I would try to recover once the players do what players do.
Do you want to add anything, Andy, or shall I?
I was muted. I didn't realize I was muted.
I wondered why you weren't talking.
First, I'd like to say that he has a glorious COVID beard in that stream, and you absolutely should watch it. Oh, you're muted now. Or am I just not hearing? I think you're muted there.
Something's happened to
your sound just vanished. Well, while your sound vanishes, I will drop on with a pretty simple answer on this one, which is I would love to say I do a lot of preparations for everything, but I tend to be broadly aware of the overall story and then just dive in and let it go. I have been GMing for so long now that the general beats and pacing and everything else that I want is sort of ingrained into me, and I just sort of let it happen, try to always ensure that something ends on a point that I like, move on to the next one. So I tend to be more of I'm loosely aware of it, I've memorized everything that I want, and then I just let the PCs do whatever they want. And sometimes that takes them outside of the box. Sometimes it builds an entirely new box. And I'm okay with that because I'm not trying to follow a predetermined plan. I'm instead trying to let the story live and breathe. And often when you have a predetermined plan behind it, it's more chance it will breathe into something you expect, but not always. Do we have sound now for you?
Yes. Is my sound back on? Okay.
Yeah.
The other answer, because these all have to be it depends answers, is for me at least, it depends on the game. Me and my friends go into different games with wildly different ideas of kind of how much freedom a player is going to have, right? Like if we all sign on for just wanting like a crunchy adversarial OSR style D&D game, we recognize that we're not necessarily playing in a sandbox. Like if what we are wanting to do is go from published adventure to published adventure and try to win fights, we just kind of roll with it, right? It's not railroading if you get on the train and buy a ticket.
True facts.
As opposed to other RPGs where we're maybe more invested in individual character growth and establishing ties to the setting and, choices. And so yeah, a lot of that just comes down to from game to game, major differences in expectation there.
So what's your ratio of book research to experiential research? Have you ever taken up a skill or visited a location specifically for your fantasy writing? The answer for me is so many times. So many times. I speak Norwegian now for a book I never even wrote. So that's pretty extreme.
For me, most of my research is absolutely just reading and writing type stuff. I am very likely to draw on experiences I already have. The trilogy I mentioned for the Shadowrun books, half of that first book, he's in basic combat training. And I wrote a thank you to my former drill instructors at the start of that book saying, I can't believe I'm thanking you guys for what you did to me, right? But like, hey, so yeah, like I'm a big fan of pulling on skills that I already have or knowledge that I already have. I'm far more likely to do that than to learn a new skill. I don't have the budget to go places just for a story, unfortunately, but I'm not above shaping a story for a place that I already know. A lot of
that's a very efficient way to do it.
And in Shadowrun, there's the elven nation of Tirtangir, which is the current state of Oregon. And I used to spend almost all my summers there. So I was able to kind of pull on some of that and, similar sort of things for games that are set in the real world or what have you. But I didn't go back to the Pacific Northwest and take a weekend to backpack around or something because then I would have lost thousands of dollars compared to what I was getting paid to write a given story, or what have you. But yeah,
so if it lines up with something you're doing, then that's a happy accident. But otherwise, no, we're not flying to Norway to do some research for a Norscan book. Sadly, I wish we were.
Unless someday I can get that dream gig where it comes with an expense account. Like that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, it would. Nope.
Yeah, it'll never happen.
No.
They'll also be paying me $5 a word and, whatever else. But yeah, it would be
living the dream.
That would be great.
I would.
That would be great. We'll let Long Shadow have the last word. Can we say verisimilitude? Yes, we can. Thank you for your question. think I did it right. Well, we're come to the end of our hour, so that is all we have time for. So thank you so much for Russell for coming on and talking to us about your homework.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for liking the idea for a session.
It was a
I
great
think that-
idea, and Lindsay completely mischaracterized it. It was his idea, not mine.
Was it?
Just-
Was it
yeah.
not yours? Oh, I didn't.
Yeah, we were
Sorry.
brainstorming, and and Andy liked that one. It was like, oh yeah,
It was a great
that.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But
I didn't want to say, because I didn't want to contradict you, but I'm glad he did, because now I can say moo.
You should have just contradicted me. I
Yeah,
just
quite.
knew you had talked about the title. I did not realize that Russell
Oh,
had
it's-
provided a smorgasbord of options that we had taken.
And I was like, it's a
up as
great topic. Let's do that.
Yeah.
good topic.
So,
Excellent. Well,
and-
thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank chat for the questions. I know we might not have gotten to every single one. Sorry, but I'm a talker. So trying to give a good answer is going to sometimes go a little long, but
It's
we
a
tried to
Rookery
tackle
standard.
most of them. And yeah, so
It
We
is
all
a
talk
Rookery
too much
standard.
here.
yeah.
We do. Yeah. But no, we're. Oh, thank you to the chat, as Russell says. Thank you to our Discord community, and thank you, as always, to our glorious Patreons who keep our ads stream free. No, keeps our streams ad free. Until the next time, I will leave you with the classic Rookery ending of good night and caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.